our grant was won with 3 countries. The main funding was for Palestine. So you can then apply for that, and I'm very happy to share ideas and brainstorm later if you want, you and everyone else.
One more question at the back. Someone had the hand up. Who was that person?
Thank you very much. I'm really curious at the panel.
Can you hold the microphone close to you?
Yeah, sorry, thank you. I'm really curious at the panel's view on the obvious changes, demands on Palestinian struggle in terms of education. So during the genocide, there were different demands. We're now facing different demands going forward. And as well as the changes in demands, what can we do as a group here to help in those structures? Thank you.
I answer both questions together, if that's okay, Dr. Shaban as well. There's an initiative, the Gaza University's Emergency Committee, which somebody will have come across. Now, unfortunately, it only covers 3 of the universities, Al-Azhar, Islamia, and Al-Aqsa, not, for example, other universities, so it's not as comprehensive as it could be. But the effort there is trying to do exactly what you mentioned, which is to try and coordinate the responses, because ultimately, what's required can't come from us, the international community, it has to come from colleagues in Gaza. And that will require that sort of committee to kind of coordinate that effort, but it does need better planning, I completely agree.
That's exactly what we are doing in our committee. We don't accept anybody unless he is accepted from Gaza. And there's a committee in there from the dean of the faculty. That's one thing. What can we do? We can do everything. Everybody, like, everybody talk about finance. So the main problem is finance. There are loads of initiatives. Everybody can support on a personal level or a governmental level. In our committee, our main supporters, we don't accept anyone from outside Jordan. We don't spend any money outside of Jordan. We only accept money in Jordan. Our main supporters are housewives.
Just to answer the questions also from an AHC perspective, so at this conference we also have a medical student from Netherlands present, Roos. She's mapping for as far as she can the projects that support medical education in Gaza, probably in collaboration with a student from Gaza later on. So maybe it's a good idea to talk to her, and we can also see what we can develop from there on with the people present, because we are here with many people present supporting medical education, and it's also important to show what we're doing together with our colleagues in Gaza and Palestine. And I guess as in what to do at the different stages, that's also what we try to make visible also within HG. So what I said, like the immediate support, which is in big terms also financial, and the online education, the midterm recovery, which is rebuilding the academic infrastructure, and the sustainable long-term collaborations where we can grow together in the future and for long-term as well. So thinking along these lines, I think we already work along those lines, and we try to bring it together under the umbrella of HG. I don't know if people online briefly want to share something on the questions that have been just asked.
Yeah, I'll keep it brief. Yes, I agree. I think mapping it would be it's a great idea. It's something that would help us obviously keep track of what's happening. There's amazing work happening across the board, so I think that would be brilliant. If I may just touch on that first question around the brain drain in Gaza, and I think that's a very important question as well, and it's something very tricky for us on the outside. Obviously, our desire is to get students to safety, to support their learning, to get them qualified, and potentially, they'll decide to go back, or they may decide not to go back. We have heard from students, for instance, those who are involved in the Sami Foundation within Gaza, saying, well, this is where we need to stay. This is where we need to kind of build these skills and ensure that there isn't wiping out of knowledge and skills within Gaza, which is obviously playing into the hands of what the occupying forces would want. They would want to drive those skills out of region. So it is a very tricky one. I don't have an answer to that. It would probably need to be a mixture of supporting students by giving them those educational opportunities, but also without necessarily jeopardizing the future of healthcare in Gaza. How do we do that? I don't have the answer.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we have come to the end of this session. Sorry, we have to
One
end
second.
it.
One
So,
second.
can we just get a round of applause for our panelists, please? And can the representative from Global Rahma Foundation come on stage? I think they have 2 minutes. Yes, Global Rahma Foundation? Yes, yeah.
Assalamualaikum. Hello everyone. Every day in Gaza, someone waits for surgery that could save their life, but often there is nowhere they can go. My name is Maria and I'm representing Global Rahma Foundation. When we think about medical care in Gaza, we often think about systems and long-term plans. But on the ground, the need comes down to something much simpler. Can a patient see a doctor? Can they receive the surgery they need? Can they be treated with dignity? Right now, for so many, the answer is still no. People live in pain because surgeries are delayed. Cancer patients, those with wounds, children with conditions, children like Maria Dia, who never received the treatment she needed. She was only 5 years old. Last year, I met a doctor who had worked in Gaza, and she said a few words that stuck by me. And she told me that they were using equipment that was only meant to be used once. But that equipment was used 200 times that day for brain surgery and for heart surgery. Hospitals do their best, but equipment are limited. That's where we focus. We facilitate surgeries, run free medical days, and support hospitals so patients can receive care even with the infrastructure fails. We help people get the treatment they need with dignity. Global Rahma Foundation has supported families in Gaza since 2014, along with 24 other countries, delivering food, medical aid, and essential support where it's needed the most. We're proud to stand alongside Alnet and welcome partnerships with those who want to turn intention into action. Together we can make healthcare in Gaza accessible and worthy of the people it serves. Thank you.
We have now the second announcement for the day with Dr. Sam. Assalamu alaikum.
My name is Osama Samara. I'm the doctor's pharmacology consultant working in Somerset Foundation Trust. I'm a member as well of Bamid. So, with a pleasure, on behalf of Bamid, I would like to announce the launch of mentorship project. Okay, so why mentorship matters? As we know, the start of Bamid, the core scheme of Bamid, and the core focus of the Bamid from the start was on empowering the doctors, empowering the healthcare workers, and as we all know, the mentorship is a cornerstone of this scheme. Mentorship is a reciprocal process where the mentor and the mentoree benefit from this process. It's about guidance, it's about creating networking and well-being of the staff and colleagues. give a context, the current situation, we have at least 20 plus doctors joined the field in UK from Palestine. The vast majority are from Gaza, and this is just in the last 6 months. They are quite well equipped, they are very knowledgeable and very motivated, but unfortunately they're facing lots of barriers, system barriers, NHS complexity. They feel lost in the system. From a single survey among those colleagues, the key needs of those colleagues are mentorship on the top priority, access to departments with job opportunities and skills, training, career development. The impacts, as we said, empowering these doctors and these colleagues, strengthening the network and strengthening the Palestinian and pro-Palestinian medical community, as well as long-term impacts and benefit on the healthcare system in Palestine. Most of these doctors, they will at some point go back to Palestine, inshallah. So, please, if you feel that you can be part of this great project, if you need a mentorship, or you can offer mentorship, or you can help this project in any way, please scan this barcode or just email us there. Thank you.
So now we come to our second keynote speaker. It's Prof. Norman Frankenstein, who is joining us online from the stage. All the stage is yours.
Hello.
So now we will be hearing from someone who does not mince words. You might know who I'm speaking about. It's Norman Frankenstein. He's an American political scientist, author, and public intellectual. He's widely known for his academic work and research on Israel, Palestine, and the politics of the Holocaust. Frankenstein earned his PhD in political science from Princeton University and has since taught at several universities. In the year 2020, Norman Frankenstein was named the 5th most influential political scientist in the world. Throughout his career, he has published books and articles that have sparked significant academic and public debates, particularly regarding Middle East politics and international law. These include the Holocaust industry, reflections on the exploitation of Jewish suffering, and Gaza, an inquest into its martyrdom. Professor Norman, can you unmute? I believe you are muted. Can you try to unmute yourself? We can't see or hear you. We just see that you are on.
وش الخيار وش الخيار بس المرة هذا عشان تعرف الشغل يدور عشان صار
Sorry for this technical issues. We are in the course from the first side. So we're going to move to the next session. And if we sort that out, we'll join us. So I'll introduce Jihan, who chair the next session, and please for the next panelists to come to the stage. Dr. Mohammed Stern, Dr. Mas Gilbert, Professor Nick Vinard, and Dr. Riyad Bashar. And also we have Nick Gordon online, in person, sorry, and Mr. Tayyip.
خالد السر ولا جاي؟ خالد السر كان الصوت طلع في المستشفى بس قبل بده يروح بودكاست لا لا حدث
Prof. Nick Maynard, he just late, so he won't be here at the moment. But the rest of the team is supposed to be around.
Tayyip Ali and Dr. Gilbert.
Okay, my name is Norm Finkelstein, and I was asked, I hear an echo. Do you have a problem with the echo?
No.
Hello? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
I'm going, I may be open twice, so I'm going to try to X out one. How is that? Okay, the echo is gone on my end. So, I was asked to give a succinct overview of how this issue of Palestine became implicated in international law and in international institutions. I'll begin with not 1947, when the issue of Palestine fell in abeyance. That basically means it ceased to exist on the world stage or on the political scene after the June 1948, after the 1948 war. In the 1960s, in international institutions, the politics and 1960s and 70s, it was really played out at two different levels, within international institutions and outside international institutions. Within those institutions, at the International Court of Justice, the most famous case was the case of what was called back then Southwest Africa. Southwest Africa was under the occupation or control of South Africa. Southwest Africa eventually became Namibia. And it was, even though it's completely forgotten now, it was the most famous case in the International Court of Justice in the post-war era. Hard to believe, it went before the ICJ on six different occasions. The basic question being, is South Africa obligated under international law to end its occupation of Southwest Africa, Namibia? And within the ICJ, it was basically a conflict between the old colonial powers and the new anti-colonial powers. By 1970, 1971, finally, the occupation of Southwest Africa was declared illegal under international law by the ICJ. Simultaneous with that, there was what was called a decolonization process unfolding in the United Nations, mostly in the UN General Assembly. And there was a landmark resolution in 1960 saying essentially that you can't use claims that a country is economically, politically, socially unprepared for independence in order to deny that country, that nation, the right to self-determination and statehood. That was a position that was diametrically the opposite of the view of the League of Nations, the precursor of the United Nations. The League of Nations said there are all of these countries, states, entities, which were, quote, unprepared for the strenuous conditions of the modern world, and that they had to be, they had to come under the tutelage of advanced powers, modern powers. That was the League of Nations position. It was overturned after World War II by the General Assembly, which essentially said, we're all ready, meaning all of these nations and countries, we're all ready for independence and self-determination. We don't require a period of tutelage. And the General Assembly presided over a protracted process of decolonizing large parts of the non-Western world. Now, that was within institutions. Outside institutions, I think it can be fairly said, though I'm not aware of any scholarly study of the subject, outside the institutions, the language of international law, the language of human rights law, it didn't exist. The dominant language outside the UN institutions was the language of national liberation, the language of armed struggle, the language of law being all bourgeois law or the law of the colonizers. And so there was certainly a segment, how large I can't provide any substantive evidence. There was certainly a segment of the international community which looked very suspiciously, not to say even contemptuously, at the idea of international law and human rights law. By the 1970s, if you might call it, revolutionary wave of the 1960s, the era of national liberation struggles, most notably, of course, Vietnam, but also Cuba and elsewhere, that era had passed. And what you saw beginning in the 70s was the beginnings of a new framework for trying to advance political, liberatory political objectives. And many people in the audience will be, I suspect, surprised to know that most of the human rights organizations that we now know, most of them didn't exist as late as the 1970s. Even Amnesty International, it was a very tiny, pretty much irrelevant political body. It first gains international attention when it receives the Nobel Peace Prize in 1977. And then thereafter, a large number of human rights organizations are formed. Human Rights Watch didn't emerge as an organization until the 1980s. And then all the organizations, the local ones, the Palestine Center for Human Rights, the B'Tselem, the Israeli Center for Human Rights in the occupied territories, they really all come into existence in the mid to late 1980s. For our purposes, the important point to make is there was now a new vocabulary for discussing the Israel-Palestine conflict. It was really no longer substantively. It was no longer the language of armed struggle, national liberation struggle, and so on and so forth. The language begins to change. It becomes the language of human rights and international law. Those were seen as the limits to what was possible in this new era when the era of national liberation struggles had effectively ebbed. In the case of Israel-Palestine, which is the concern of the people attending the conference today, you could say the following steps occurred. There was UN Resolution 242 in 1967, which established the principle that it was, quote, inadmissible to acquire territory by war. And it was a simultaneous principle based on Article 2 of the UN Charter that all states in the region have the right to live in peace and enjoy their national self-determination. That was the consensus opinion at the time of UN Resolution 242. There was no Palestine question per se addressed in 242. There was mention at the end of resolving the refugee question, but that was in the resolution. It was pretty much neither here nor there. Beginning in the mid-1970s, the international community, including the Palestine Liberation Organization, were on board for a two-state settlement of the Israel-Palestine conflict based on two principles. Principle number one, inadmissibility of acquiring territory by war. Principle number two, that a people has the right to self-determination up to and including statehood. And based on those two principles, the Palestinians having a constituting a people under international law, and Israel having no title to the occupied territories, the West Bank, including East Jerusalem and Gaza. Based on those two principles, the international community resolved the conflict, the terms of the conflict, on the basis of a full Israeli withdrawal from the occupied Palestinian territories. Sometimes the abbreviation OPT is used, and those occupied Palestinian territories being the West Bank, including East Jerusalem and Gaza. And that was the basic terms. Those were the basic terms set forth under international law for resolving the conflict. Now, I should say at this point that if you look at what's called international law is basically an uneven compromise between the law as it's stated in the books and politics, namely what is politically feasible at a particular point in time. So to take a concrete example which constantly comes up, the example is, if under international law it's inadmissible to acquire territory by war, then how could Israel have title to territory that exceeded the UN partition resolution boundaries? The UN partition resolution boundaries gave Israel roughly 56% of British mandated Palestine. By the end of the first Arab-Israeli War in 1949, by the end, Israel had acquired 80% of Palestine. So the obvious question is, if the principle exists, it's inadmissible to acquire territory by war, then shouldn't Israel be forced to withdraw to the 56% of Palestine that had been awarded to it in the UN partition resolution? And the answer is, in my opinion, it's not a purely legal answer. It's what you might call a pragmatic answer. That's a mixture of politics and law. There exists the political reality that Israel had occupied 80% of Palestine after the first Arab-Israeli war. And then there was the legal question that the West Bank, including Gaza, the West Bank, including East Jerusalem and Gaza, were occupied Palestinian territories, and Palestinians had a right to self-determination. And the international community tried to figure out a pragmatic balancing of law and realpolitik, the fact that Israel occupied those territories already for a significant period of time, roughly 20 years, when it came before the UN General Assembly in the early to mid 1970s. Well, those were the terms for ending the conflict. I will repeat myself at the risk of tedium. In my opinion, it was a mixture of law and politics. The main legal, I should say, from there on in, from the mid-1970s, from there on in, the international community overwhelmingly, really, you can say, with two exceptions, the US and Israel, there were a handful of South Pacific islands, Nauru, Tuvalu, Palau, the Solomon Islands, the Marshall Islands, who joined the US and Israel. But with those marginal and really totally irrelevant exceptions, the entire international community embraced the two-state settlement, with the exception of the US and Israel. And it's easy to demonstrate that fact. All you have to do is turn to the annual UN General Assembly resolution entitled Peaceful Settlement of the Palestine Conflict. And you'll see in the General Assembly, the vote is typically something like 166 to 4, 168 to 5, being Israel, United States, and those South Pacific atolls.
Sorry,
So the general.
Norman, can you hear us? We have
Yes.
another 5 minutes if we can conclude the two.
Okay. Yeah. So at the level of the General Assembly and the UN, the question had been resolved in those terms. Moving now to the International Court of Justice, there were, I would say, 3 main developments. The first development was in July 2004, where the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, declared the wall that Israel was building in the West Bank, declared the wall to be illegal under international law. In order for the ICJ to reach that conclusion that the wall was illegal, they also found the following. They found that all Israeli settlements in the occupied Palestinian territories, were illegal under international law. They found that the Palestinians were a people, had the right to self-determination, including statehood. They found that East Jerusalem was an integral part of the occupied Palestinian territories. And they found that Israel had no title to any of the West Bank, including East Jerusalem and Gaza. So you can say it was a complete victory in the ICJ. It was a complete victory. The vote was 14-1. The only dissenting vote was the US. It was a complete victory for the Palestinian position as it had been articulated since the mid-1970s. The one distinction that one has to make is, and I believe it's an important distinction, it was a victory within a framework. The framework was 2 states along the June 1967 border. It was, you might say, it was a historic victory for the Palestinians on all of what are called the final status issues, but it was within a framework that large numbers of people, exactly how many I can't say, rejected. It was within the framework of two states, which have become the law, international law, as I said, by the mid-1970s. The next major decision, much closer to us, actually, it's just a few months ago, really, was July 2025, when the International Court of Justice declared the Israeli occupation of the West Bank, including East Jerusalem and Gaza, as illegal under international law. It being an illegal occupation, the Israelis had to quote the expression in the decision, they had to withdraw from all of the territories, quote, as rapidly as possible. Now, that was what you might call the penultimate development. The ultimate development, which I will end with you on because of reasons of time, the ultimate development was a complete catastrophe, a complete disaster, a complete capitulation to the United States under President Trump and to Israel. And that catastrophe, that disaster, is largely unknown. In November 17, 2025, the UN Security Council passed Resolution 2803. And 2803, to just give you the bare bones, 2803 literally abolished international law. All of the victories that were scored by the Palestinians and their supporters since the mid-1970s, all of those victories were erased. They vanished. And instead what you got was, and I know it will be hard for some people to believe, but it's a fact, I believe, the UN Security Council gave the deed of Gaza to Donald J. Trump. He literally was handed the deed to Gaza. Gaza ceased to be a part of the occupied Palestinian territories. It even ceased to be occupied. It was an entity just dangling in the air in a legal limbo, and the deed to it was handed to President Trump. As to the Palestinian right to determination, self-determination, as I told you at the very beginning of my remarks, the notion that a people was not prepared for self-determination and independence, that notion was challenged and dismissed in 1960. But now, all of a sudden, it re-entered the vocabulary of the UN. It said that the Palestinian people were not ready for self-determination and statehood, that the Palestinian Authority had to prove its readiness before its statehood could be considered. And it went on to say Israel was not obliged to withdraw from Gaza unless it wanted to, and the Palestinians were not to be granted any final settlement unless Israel agreed to it in negotiations. So all of the rights of the Palestinians were, as a result of UN Resolution 20, UN Security Council Resolution 2803, all their rights were annulled, they were negated, they were cancelled. Now, the last issue I'll address briefly is, it might be asked, why did the Soviet Union and China agree to this resolution? After all, that's not their record on the subject. And number two, they had veto power. Why did they agree to it? And the reason was quite interesting. It was the same reason given by Russia and China. The reason was the Russian representative said, this is a dark day in the history of the United Nations. And then it ended its remarks by saying, don't say we didn't warn you. So why did they do it? Why did Russia and China do it? The answer was very clear. They said all the Arab and Muslim states support the resolution. They said Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Indonesia, Pakistan, Jordan, Egypt, Algeria, and I didn't list them all. They all supported it. They all lined up with the United States and Israel. And in the face of that, the Russians and the Chinese, some of you may know the expression, not to be more pious than the Pope. They said that the Arab and Muslim nations all supported. We can't veto it. We will abstain. So it was 13-0 with 2 abstentions, and the 2 abstentions were Russia and China. And with that one act, all of international law, as it had come to support the struggle of the people of Palestine, was abolished.
Sorry,
I'm done.
we have to cut the question shortly because we are just running out of time and we still have another session to run. Thank you very much. And
Okay, so I should,
yes.
should I take questions or should I get off?
Sorry, 2 questions.
Okay.
2 questions. The lady.
I have one question.
The lady. Okay. All right, we'll take both. The lady first, and then sorry.
Thank you, Professor Finkelstein. That's very sobering and depressing note to end on. My question to you is, yesterday the British government decided to cut all funding to the international humanitarian law teams and international law monitoring teams who monitor violations of international law. And many of the medics in this room have submitted evidence to these teams, to the UK Foreign Office. My question to you is, how long or what are the implications for the UK government if it continues to ignore international law and its obligations to IHL?
I will take the second question.
Yeah. So the gentleman.
Thank you very much for giving a brief history of the Palestinian and Israeli conflict. My question is, the Security Council, there are 5 permanent members, and they have the veto power. One of them, with veto, then it can be no retribution. And all throughout the history, I know from 1960 onwards, either America has given veto or the Soviet Union has given it. Why this time the China or Russia has not given veto? It cannot
veto for what exactly?
veto on the Gaza or the Palestinian. Gaza became the part of the state. Actually, that Donald Trump is state.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
How it can be?
Professor, have you heard the 2 questions?
I heard the first question. I couldn't make out the second question.
Okay, so basically, what are the implications for the UK government if it continues to ignore international law? And the second one, why hasn't anyone vetoed this time around Donald Trump's proposition in the UN Security Council? I think that's the question, right?
Well, rare is the day that the Europeans or the Americans obey international law, unless it's convenient to them. That's another way of saying the law is not self-executing unless you have force behind it, and the force is not going to be brought to bear unless a great power sees an advantage to bringing force to bear. Right now, I think it's a very difficult moment because even if the war ends favorably for Iran, even if that were the case, I don't think that any power is now prepared to confront the US and Europe over the question of Palestine. So, will it be resurrected again? I can't answer that, but I think at the level of the international community, I can't see at this point any power prepared to intervene to stop the US and Israel, in particular Israel. The US simply plays a blocking role, but the Israeli agenda, I don't see evidence of that, but those things can always surprise you. As to why there was no veto, I thought I explained it, but maybe I didn't make myself clear. Obviously, the US, France, and Great Britain were not going to exercise their veto.
Okay, first of all, apologies for all the delays. I think we're about 1 hour behind schedule. But before we begin our third session, I want to just take a moment to pay tribute to Dr. Hassan Abu Safiya, who really should be with us today. Instead, he is going through some of the most horrendous, probably experiences of his life, some of the most horrendous conditions. He could be in Israeli captivity, and his plight really is the plight of many healthcare workers in Gaza, and a reason why this event and this panel in particular is so important. So thank you to everyone who's here in person, and also thank you to everyone who's tuning in online. I was born in Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis, to two medical doctors who met at Shifa Hospital. So it is truly an honor for me to be here among these incredible individuals who have spotlighted the plight of healthcare and healthcare delivery and education in Palestine, and in particular in Gaza. And you know, first I initially thought with the panel that we have such a rich panel, it was almost criminal that we have only 1 hour, but especially with the delays, we're going to have to be really ruthless with time. So I'm just going to go for a brief introduction of the panelists. Shan, if you go ahead and call on, and then I've got Miriam here who will also be moderating the panel with me. Here we've got Dr. Mads Gilbert. Really needs no introduction, but Dr. Mads Gilbert is a Norwegian physician, author, humanitarian, and professor of emergency medicine. He's been actively involved with solidarity work with the Palestinians since the 1980s. He travels annually to Palestine, to the occupied Palestinian territories, and has worked at Gaza's Shifa Hospital during Israel's assaults in 2006, 2009, 2012, and 2014. He has for years trained medical students at Al-Azhar University, and he's been continuing medicine initiative during the genocide in Gaza. His focus is on supporting and enhancing Palestinian governance and control of their own healthcare rather than replacing it by NGO interventions.
Thank you so much. It's my absolute pleasure to present Dr. Bimasharaka. He is consultant plastic and burn surgeon here in the UK, chair of the Advisory Council of PALMED Europe, and chair of the Consultative Council of PALMED Europe Association, the Palestinian Doctors Association. Also former president of PALMED Europe and founding member of the UK branch of PALMED UK, registered charity founded in 2011. He has honored several medical relief delegations, most recently to Gaza in March 2024, where he had first-hand experience of the challenges facing medical students in Gaza.
We've also got Professor Niamh Orden. Professor Niamh is an Israeli professor of international law and human rights at Queen Mary University in London. He was the first director of Physicians for Human Rights Israel, established during the first Intifada. And he started his academic career in the Department of Politics and Government at Ben Gurion University, where he taught for 17 years. Over the past few years, he has focused his work on attacks on medical care in general and in Gaza in particular, and he critically examined how legal frameworks shape, justify, and sometimes enable such attacks. And we've also got Dr. Khalid Nasser. Is Khalid still with us? So we'll carry on. So we've also got Professor Neckman, who's running late. He may actually be joining us shortly, so hopefully, fingers crossed.
This short video as well.
Oh, we've got a film. Okay, we've got a film to show briefly before we begin.
There are rules, but in Gaza, those rules seem to have collapsed. Here, not only civilians are targeted, but also those who try to save them. Since October 2023, data from the United Nations and the World Health Organization indicate that more than 1,700 healthcare workers in Gaza have been killed. Doctors, nurses, and paramedics have been killed while carrying out their humanitarian duty. Killing has not been the only violation. Hundreds of healthcare workers have been detained. amid reports of ill treatment and torture in detention facilities. Among them is Dr. Hussam Abu Safia, who was detained while carrying out his medical duties amid a prolonged lack of clear information about his fate. Also, Dr. Marwan al-Hams, who was arrested during the Israeli attacks. Dr. Adnan al-Barsh, head of the orthopedics department, who was also killed in detention after a brutal assault and torture. And Dr. Marwan Sultan, director of the Indonesian hospital, who was killed along with his family as part of a wider campaign that targeted a number of healthcare workers. On the ground, more than 400 attacks on healthcare facilities have been documented, and over 160 medical facilities have been destroyed or rendered inoperable. Hospitals are no longer safe places. They have become targets. Under the blockade, medical supplies have been prevented from reaching in sufficient quantities, forcing doctors to work in harsh conditions with near non-existent resources. Despite conditions that words fail to fully describe, Gaza's healthcare sector continues to perform in a way that inspires pride and respect. It has not merely been a system of medical services, but has emerged as a front line of resilience, offering a rare example of dedication and professionalism at a time when healthcare systems elsewhere in the world struggle under far lesser pressures. In Gaza, it is not resources that have been the decisive factor, but willpower. Doctors, nurses, and paramedics work without interruption, creating solutions out of nothing and facing death daily with conscience and strong sense of moral responsibility. This resilience is not a fleeting exception, but a living testament to the human capacity when one holds fast to their humanitarian duty, whatever the challenges. Paramedics, too, have not been spared. A number of Palestinian Red Crescent personnel have been killed while carrying out their duties. Field testimonies and human rights reports have also documented incidents in which paramedics were buried or left beneath rubble, without the possibility of being rescued in time. There are stories, and among them, the story of Dr. Ala al-Najjar, who lost 9 of her children in a single airstrike while she was carrying out her duty inside the hospital. All of this is in violation of the Geneva Conventions, which stipulate the protection of medical personnel, the prohibition of targeting hospitals, and the assurance of humanitarian aid access. The International Committee of the Red Cross also affirms that healthcare must remain neutral under all circumstances. What the healthcare sector in Gaza has delivered is not merely professional performance under pressure, but a humanitarian and ethical achievement that deserves to be told, honored, and taught as a model of patience and steadfastness. In Gaza, it is not only doctors' ability to save lives that is being tested, but our shared humanity, because the collapse of medical ethics is the collapse of humanity itself. That's it.
Matt, we're going to kick off with you. You experienced the attacks on the Shifa hospital back in 2014 directly. Can you give us a sense of how the landscape of healthcare in Gaza has changed since then?
Thank you, and assalamu alaikum, and thank you for inviting me. I think one thing that strikes me when we talk about healthcare in Gaza since the 7th of October is that for some people it seems like this happened now for the first time, attacks on healthcare. But if you go to the what is called SSA, which is the World Health Organization surveillance system for attacks on healthcare, they actually keep very detailed record on attacks on healthcare, regardless in Syria, in Venezuela, in Palestine. And it's a dashboard, so you can actually play around with it and find yourself, find the numbers. And I did a search on attacks on healthcare in occupied Palestine from the 1st of January 2006 until the 12th of June 2025. And the total number of Israeli attacks on Palestinian healthcare in that period is 2,942. And what we saw in 2006, 2009, 2012, 2014 were systematic attacks on healthcare. And the first time I saw it, in fact, was in Beirut in 1982, during the invasion and the siege of Beirut and the bombing of Beirut. They systematically bombed hospitals, the psychiatric hospital in Beirut, ambulances, and they did double attacks. First they bombed, and then when the rescue teams came, they came back and killed the rescue teams. So my point is that this is nothing new, unfortunately. It has reached new levels of horror during the time since the 7th of October. But my question to all of us, and in particular to the international medical associations and Western governments, is how come that this has been allowed to go on for more than 25 years? And the answer is one of the key moral and historical issues when it comes to Palestine. It is Israeli impunity. And Israeli impunity in my world and in my experience is one of the most toxic and destructive elements of international politics with regards to the Israeli settler colonial project. Because when you let a villain or a brutal force go on with abuse of international law and attacks on be it schools or universities or hospitals, they can just go on doing it because there is no consequences, there is no punishment, there is no limitation. And during these 21 years and the 2,942 attacks on healthcare in Palestine, Israeli attacks has killed 977 Palestinian healthcare workers and patients, and wounded almost 3,000. So over the last 19 years, Israeli attacks on Palestinian healthcare has killed and wounded around 4,000 Palestinians. Those numbers are known. It did not start on the 4th of October, and I think it is the widespread and total Israeli impunity that is one of the causative factors. Thank you.
Dr. Riyad, you went to Gaza after October 2023. Can you tell us what you witnessed there and describe what most stood out to you, but also, you've witnessed basically Gaza on survival mode. So how do you sort of balance, you're obviously with PalMed and you guys work on, delivering education. How do you balance, the immediate needs, the urgent needs, medical needs in Gaza in situations like that with sort of a long-term goal of creating a more sustainable healthcare workforce and healthcare system and education in Gaza?
Thank you very much. Well, speaking about what I have seen in Gaza is very emotional because what I witnessed, everybody, I think I know many of the faces who have visited Gaza and exactly saw the same. Start from the checkpoint till the hospital in the way back, till the way back. People are living in shelters. It's not a tent. Not like the way people they get when there's a war or something. UN and all the international agencies, they build tents. Those people, they were not in tent. I'm starting from outside, what I witnessed. And when I went, it was the good time, if there is a good time in the war. When I went, it was still the Rafah point is open and some of the supply was coming drops by drops to keep people just alive. So people were scattered in the roads with the little plastic sheets or some cloth here and there. In the hospital, it wasn't a hospital, although it was the only hospital functioning in Gaza. It was a European hospital. Shifa at that time
was burned completely, and nearly 1.8 million people were supplied by that hospital, the European hospital. By the way, in Gaza, you should excuse me. We count every building like hospitals, and those buildings are not counted like a GP surgery in this country. And they count them as a hospital, 38, 39 hospitals. But they are very small in compared to the population. So we're talking about people who are in siege for 17 years, and they went under this brutal, war with no resource and no reserve at all. We entered the hospital, packed with displaced people. You cannot go easily inside. I'm not exaggerating, and I'm sure everybody has witnessed this. Every hour, like 7, 8, 10 people are coming continuously, mostly women and children. And this, I thought that this is my only observation, personal observation, but I came across interviews of so many people. They are saying they were kids and women mostly. We are not saying some other, they were there, but 85% at least were women and children. And I'm not surprised by that, because since the start of the war, this was the message, everybody gets, that there's no human being in Gaza. And that's why we are talking about ethics. Killing 20,000 children is not a collateral damage. 16,000 women is not a collateral damage. This is something intentional. Yes, we know that there will be conflicts and wars, but as we are talking, and you saw in the films, there were some specific people targeted. Medical people, they were targeted with their families. A lot of the prominent doctors in Gaza, and they can correct me, they have been, taken off. Not only as a person, all his family has been taken off. Anyhow, I'll just finish the story quickly. Hospital was packed so much with people, you cannot move anywhere. The A&E is full 24/7. No resources. And I have now a witness who was after me, who saw this in reality. I'm talking about the good time in March 2024. Things have become much worse after that time. So if you want to transfer a patient who's lucky to reach to the hospital, to the theaters, to the operation theaters, you cannot, because all corridors are packed with people on the floors. And if he's lucky to reach to the theaters, you don't have anything in the theater. You ask for any switches, you don't have. You ask for any, even the simple things, you don't have. The instruments are not, sterilized well, because they were overwhelmed with the numbers of the patients. So it was, a disaster by all. So I just want to jump all this, and say that, unfortunately, as Matt was saying, this is still going on while we are speaking. The war has stopped, as people think. They think the war has stopped, but the same is happening. We are in direct contact with the people. They don't have any medical, supplies. All their equipment are failing, and even people thinking that food are coming now better than before, like they were starved. No, not all foods are going. It's a specific types of foods which make them alive, but they it's used. So how do you think about war stop, but no vaccination for the children, no follow-up for women who are pregnant, and no care, proper medical care. This is damaging a society for decades ahead. We will be in a communicable disease, we will be on infectious disease, we will have malnutrition, everything are the same like before. So I think, the message which I think should come from here, we want people to tell us, we were waiting for Professor Frankenstein and, Gordon, everybody to suggest something really, how we can end this. People are still dying. And I did not mention the people with chronic illness. Imagine, like in any population, there is a huge, and through all the war, there was no medical service whatsoever for those people. Heart patient, kidney patient, lung patient, cancer patient, nobody was getting anything. So I feel that we need, a strong voice, that we want something to happen. We are calling for medical facility to be run by WHO, by United Nations, by whoever, but allow the medical supply to go for the people inside. Stop this. This is not an excuse that, you are not getting what you want by war. Now you want to get it by pressurizing the vulnerable people. This is not fair.
We've got now Professor Maynard managed to make it. We're very glad that you're with us. So just a quick introduction. Professor Maynard is a consultant upper GI surgeon at Oxford University Hospital and associate professor of surgery at Oxford University. He has visited Gaza regularly since 2010 to teach medical students and more recently with Medical Aid for Palestinians to carry out and deliver surgical help in Gaza. He has made 3 trips to Gaza since October 2023, where he provided surgical care at Nasser and Aqsa hospitals, and his first-hand accounts and testimony have made headlines. You've spoken, Professor Maynard, a lot about what you've seen in Gaza, the deliberate starvation, the targeting of sometimes children. Can you just give us a quick overview of what you've witnessed? You've just heard from Dr. Riyad about what he's seen in Gaza, and you've been to Gaza after 2023.
Thank you, and apologies for being late. I'm blaming British Airways for that. Each time I go to Gaza, each time I've been there since 2000, since October 7th, I couldn't imagine it would have been as bad as the last time, and each time I went it was inestimably worse. I've seen with my own eyes war crimes being carried out almost on a daily basis. I'm not an international lawyer, but I've seen things which I'm no doubt genocidal acts and clear evidence of trying to ethnically cleanse Gaza. So I've seen the most appalling things, and particularly on my last trip, I think, when I saw multiple young teenage boys being shot by the Israeli military. Many of them dying for obvious reasons. But even in the other trips, I think the appalling explosive injuries, predominantly in women and children, and on the last couple of trips in particular, the appalling effects of malnutrition and people clearly dying as a result of the forced blockade of food getting in. They're coming in profoundly malnourished anyway, which means that the explosive injuries, the gunshot injuries that we repair in surgery don't heal. The repairs break down, they get appalling infections. And not only are they malnourished in the first place, but when they are trying to recover from the surgery, we've got no nutrition to give them. Literally no nutrition, no enteral nutrition, no liquid feed we can give them, no intravenous feeding. And I could speak for a long time about naming the children, the teenagers, the adults who I looked after, who I operated on, who died as a result of lack of nutrition. So I've witnessed, as many others have, the most appalling things, and like many others, felt I had this absolute duty to talk out about what I've seen, to share with as many people, as many audiences as possible, because you're not going to get it from our media, you're not going to get it from our government. And so I felt this compulsion to share what I've seen.
So can you talk us through the impact on the healthcare workers? What's the psychological impact of working under those conditions? How are people managing, because they're managing both their own experiences of living through that and observing close family members and the wider community?
Yes, as you can imagine, it's been devastating for them. And I every time I leave Gaza, my last trip was for just under 5 weeks, but I feel physically and emotionally completely wrecked. And yes, I get a chance to go out. We all get a chance to go out. The Gazan healthcare workers have been doing this for nearly 2.5 years. And on successive trips, I've met old friends who I worked with on previous trips, and one of them, a wonderful general surgeon in Nasser Hospital,
I didn't recognise when I first saw them because he lost nearly 40 kilograms in weight. So they are physically suffering massively. They've been starved. I mean, when I was most recently there in the summer, we all lost a load of weight because we had very little food. We had more food than the locals there, and they have lost a huge amount of it. A lot of them are ill, and of course they're doing these incredibly intense shifts in the operating theatre in the emergency department, and then they're having to go off and try and find some food for their families who are starving in their tents. And a lot of the evidence I've got, a lot of the teenage boys I operate on have been shot at the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation sites. My colleagues from NASA had been going there to get food themselves for their families and witness with their own eyes some of these young boys being shot by the Israeli military. So they are physically suffering, but also mentally suffering terribly. My close friend who I told you lost 40 kilograms in weight, I was on several occasions he almost passed out during an operation and had to go and sit down. And on one occasion he had to leave because halfway through this laparotomy someone came in and told him his sister had just been killed. And he had to go and see his family. So words cannot really do justice to what they have been through and the amount of their suffering.
I think I speak for everyone when I say that international law, the failure of international law has been a failure of the highest order. I mean, we've always heard how healthcare facilities, healthcare workers are among the most protected in international law. So maybe Professor Lee can tell us, what does international law actually say about the attacks on medical facilities and stuff?
First, I want to thank you for inviting me here. It's such a great honor to be among so many medics. I'll begin with the bad news. And the bad news is that the law will not set us free. And we should not put too much weight on the law. And before I discuss the particular attacks on healthcare and what the law says about them, I want to mention 3 quick points. One is when you look at the history of international law, we have to keep in mind that it was created through the encounter with colonialism in the 15th, 16th, 17th centuries in order to justify the colonial project, okay, to legitimize it and give it an ethical glance. And that element is still within the law. Second, we need to remember that international law is the law agreed about by state actors. And state actors do not like and are afraid and are threatened by non-state actors. And in this case, the Palestinians are a non-state actor. And third, legal work is interpretive work. It's where the lawyer enters the courtroom or writes an appeal and they interpret the law. And the gates of interpretation are always open. And you can do any acrobatics and any jiu-jitsu you want with the law. So those are 3 points we have to keep in mind about the law. Now, what does the law tell us about medical units and staff? It begins with a categorical imperative. It tells us it is prohibited to attack medical units and staff. Full stop. Complete prohibition. But the law works through a prohibition and exception. So immediately after the prohibition, it adds the exception. What are the exceptions? There's 2 exceptions. One, when the hospital is used to shield combatants, arms depots, anything like that. And 2, when the hospital is misused to carry out acts harmful to the enemy. What are acts harmful to the enemy? That's a matter of interpretation. One can say that if spiders are hiding in the hospital, that's an act harmful to the enemy. One can say that if a patient that is a wounded combatant calls on the phone and tells other combatants that there are soldiers outside, that's also an act harmful to the enemy. It's a matter of interpretation. And looking at the history of hospital bombings from 1911 until today, 1911 was the first time the Italian regime used airplanes to bomb medical units in Libya, and until today, we see that state parties consistently use these exceptions to justify their attacks. And I have to say that over the years, Israel has become the leader of using these exceptions, okay? And that's what I call medical lawfare. It's the use of the law in order to justify these attacks. The problem with Israel's justifications, and with this I'll end, that even if the exceptions occur, and we know from case after case, and I've studied in my work, that Israel fabricates it. We were told that there's a command center under Shifa Hospital. Israeli soldiers invaded the hospital. They looked and they looked and they filmed and they filmed and they found nothing. They said the same about other hospitals, they found nothing. But even with these fabrications, the law also tells us something else. It says even if the hospital is misused and carries out acts harmful to the enemy, the commander needs to invoke the principle of proportionality. The principle of proportionality tells us that the commander needs to weigh the advantages of the attack versus the harm that the attack will generate to civilians, etc. Now here comes the glitch in the interpretation. The commander inflates the advantage and puts blinkers on the harm, okay? Now what the doctors here have said, I think, is that an attack on a medical unit is not only the 4,000 people that Matt said, that's the people that were killed during the event of the attack. But the attack has reverberating harm. When you bomb a cancer hospital in Gaza, the only cancer hospital in Gaza, that's a death sentence to the 10,000 cancer patients in Gaza and to the 2,000 patients each year that might have been diagnosed with cancer. So an attack on a hospital, in my perspective, the harm you're generating, it's like a weapon of mass destruction, no less. And that's where the doctors can come in. The doctors can come and correct the lawyers and the military commanders and tell them, you do not know how to measure harm. We know how to measure harm. That is our profession. And you are not measuring it correctly. And we need to expand the notion of harm that is generated when attacking a medical unit. I'll end there.
So I know both of you wanted to come back on what was just said there, is that correct?
2 points. Thank you. I totally agree with you, of course, and I think one sensitive indicator of the reverberation of the attacks on healthcare in Gaza for the last 3.5 years is by you can measure that by measuring the loss of life expectancy
and that has been studied. A paper was published in the Lancet, and they had used very sophisticated statistics and direct numbers from Gaza, and they could show that during the first 12 months after the 7th of October, the average life expectancy in Gaza dropped from 75 years, which was the average life expectancy before the 7th of October. That was already 9 years shorter than the average life expectancy in Israel, illustrating the medical apartheid element. But shockingly, that life expectancy dropped by 35 years during the first 12 months of the attack on Gaza. So it was cut in half, down to 35 years. And this has never been seen to my knowledge, and I've done a lot of research on this in medical literature. And that is the combined effect of the killing, the lack of water, the lack of food, the lack of medical system, of follow-up of the injured, and of course the lack of treatment for all the chronic diseases, what we call avoidable death, number one. My second point is, yes, we all agree to the horrible situation, but through the years I've been working in the medical system in Gaza, there has been one surviving factor and one survival factor for the population, and that is the Palestinian healthcare workers. They, and they alone, has been standing by their people, never yielding, never surrendering, and never ever letting their patients be alone. And they have sacrificed life and health and family, and I think we should give the Palestinian healthcare workers today a big applause for their resilience.
Sorry, you left me with nothing to say more, because I was exactly going to these 2 points, and one more point, and I agree with what you're saying, Paul. What we witnessed, that it's not only the hospitals which has been targeted. Yes, they have targeted the hospital. They target the doctors in their houses. They target the medical personnel in their duties. You know, okay, I don't want to go in contradiction with any international law. Those examples in our film who are just trying to rescue people and they have been buried alive. What was the law, or what law can justify this? You know, it was a dirty war. It was not like the usual war. We have witnessed war. When something happened in one of the wars, here or there, a small incidents, we find it amplified in the media and everybody talking about it. But what we have seen in Gaza, it's just like alive massacres, alive, 24/7, and everybody in this world is watching what's happening. And you know, it doesn't need international law, it doesn't need anything, it needs some ethics, it needs some human sense that I should avoid children, I should avoid women, I shouldn't stop food and medicine. Okay, they are my enemies, but still they have right of life. You know, I shouldn't stop them from, you know, having food. I just want to contradict a little bit, because when we were doing the operation, we didn't find even food for the normal people. You know, that's why they were malnutrition. At some stage, the food was not allowed to Gaza, and a lot of basic operation was failing. Not only because of bad sterilization or poor instrument, because of malnutrition. And you know, many people, they were not healing and they break down very quickly after the operations for this reason. So is this something we need an international law to prevent?
Just in about 2-3 minutes, we're going to open the floor for Q&A just so we can finish my segment. But quick question, Neve. Realistically speaking, how can international, with everything that you mentioned, how can international law actually be upheld or enforced in situations like Gaza? I mean, when we look at public opinion has shifted dramatically over the past few years, and people are now supporting BDS, Boycott, Divestment and Sanctions movement, as really the only way where they feel like they can apply pressure. What are your thoughts on that? Very briefly.
I'll just say one word to what was said here. I'm a co-author of a paper led by Dr. Muhammad Kanji from the NHS BARS. And we've looked at data of killing of health professionals in different conflict sites and comparing that to data of killing of civilians. And in Gaza, it's by far more than any other conflict site that we've looked at. And 6% of healthcare workers, over 6% of healthcare workers have been killed in Gaza, while 2-point-something% of civilians. So you're 3 times more likely to be killed in Gaza if you're a healthcare worker than if you're a civilian, which is kind of, and that relates to what you were saying. But why are they targeting the healthcare workers in their homes? And that is, I think, a crucial question. And the answer, in my opinion, is that in order to govern a society, you need a health system. And the goal is to make Gaza ungovernable. And in order to make Gaza ungovernable, you have to kill the healthcare workers. Okay? So there's a method to this madness, I think, that is behind it. Now, regarding your question, I mean, we're now moving into a world of might makes right? I mean, what we have illegal wars right and left. We have Trump and Israel doing as they wish, targeting constantly against the law, and none of the European countries are standing up to them, and in this way they are complicit in the dismantlement of the post-World War II legal order and in the erosion of the norms, including the norm obliging warring parties not to attack medical units. So it's our government here, and it's all the European governments that are complicit with this, except maybe Spain. Now, what can we do? We have to resist. So first of all, most of you work in the NHS. The NHS has Palantir as one of its major systems. You have to refuse to work with Palantir. You have to get your union to say, we're not working with Palantir. We have an oath, and our oath is not to harm, and now we're paying money to a system that harms. You have pension funds. You have pension funds. Your pension fund is invested in the war machine. How can a doctor's pension fund be invested in war machines? Go to your pension funds and tell them stop. And then they have the BDS. The BDS is a campaign. It's not a principle. There's no principle to boycott Israel. It's a strategy. And the strategy says something very simple. It says, we want the implementation of the UN resolutions and human rights law. Is that so outrageous? Is that outrageous? It's not outrageous. And until you do that, we will boycott. When you implement them, we will stop the boycott. It's not a principle, it's a strategy. And yet, what has the government done, and what have governments throughout Europe doing? Saying to us that if we support the implementation of international law, we're anti-Semites. Right? So we have to resist this. We have to say no. We want the implementation of international law. It's not a big ask. It's the basics.
Somebody's got a roving mic. You've got a roving mic, so we'll go 1, 2, 3. We'll take them in threes. 1, 2, 3. Yep.
Thank you. I want to ask Mads and Nick, you're doing great work and you're also very vocal. Are you not concerned that you will be stopped from entering next time for a mission? And if you're not worried, my next point is, if you're not worried, there are medics and surgeons who've been there who are not willing to speak up and call out genocide, although they're willing to describe what they've seen. So why is that?
Maybe at the front, please.
Yes, so it's an invitation question, because I think to help to stop the genocide, we need to think, so it's also to hold those complicits accountable, and one of those organizations is the Israeli Medical Association, which is built to uphold its ethical obligation as a member of the global medical community. Has repeatedly justified and remained silent in the face of attacks of healthcare in Gaza. With the People's Health Movement, we are going to try and organize a global mobilization to suspend the IMA from the World Medical Association, which is going to be present in Rotterdam in the Netherlands on October 7th. So that's an invitation for all of you to join us. And then more concretely, because we are here in the UK and the BMA has already suspended or boycotted the IMA, so I wanted to ask if you were involved in these efforts and how you would advise other countries to do so.
So, just one question before we move on. If people want to find out more about that initiative, where can they find more information, please?
Soon on peoplesphnmovement.org or come to me.
Okay, thank you. There was one more person, yes, gentleman here.
Thank you for the talks. I returned from Gaza not long ago and share the depth of feeling expressed. The level of destruction is difficult to prepare oneself for, and the heroism of the healthcare workers as well. I was particularly struck by the lack of Israeli pharmaceuticals in Gaza, and in fact I see more Israeli pharmaceuticals in the UK. I would urge all doctors who are interested in this issue to be taking action in their workplace. Just coming to conferences like this and insulting Israel from afar while supporting it in a way which is most meaningful, which is with your money, I don't think is really going to achieve anything. With regards to the BMA, several of us have been involved in these initiatives. I don't place any faith in the WMA having any meaningful impact here, and Israel has already been isolated, but from the community at large, it simply is supported by our governments. So we shouldn't place any faith in international law. The action has to come from us, and we need to starve Israel of all funding. That is the first thing we can do.
Thank you. We'll start with those three, if that's okay.
Yeah, the question I want to answer is the risk of not being let in again. If you look at the last snapshot from OCHA, UN OCHA, for this week, the impact situation in Gaza, the number of emergency medical teams in Gaza currently is 36, which is nothing. And the number of international participants in the emergency medical teams is now 72, which is, of course, absolutely nothing, which means that Israel has wetted all the lists of organizations and all the lists of persons provided by the organizations who wants to go in to support the Palestinian medical system. So it's down to an absolute minimum, you could say zero. I traveled to Cairo on the 8th of October, and I stayed in Cairo for 2.5 months trying to get in, and I was not allowed in. And with me, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of medical workers. So that's a very critical choice. Should we shut up and go in on the mercy of the occupiers, or should we speak up and contribute to the resistance against the occupation? For me, that question is very closely linked to the fact that the Palestinian medical workers in Gaza, they can manage without us, but they cannot manage without our solidarity and our activism. Thank you.
I'll add to that. I mean, I agree with all of that. This was an inevitability that the Israelis were going to stop most healthcare workers going in. When they announced their new planned registration process almost a year ago, this was exactly what everyone predicted was going to do. And most organisations now have been stopped completely from sending people in. I describe it that they're doing to the medical aid service what they've done to the nutrition, so they're GHFing the medical humanitarian aid systems. So all they're going to, if you look at the registration process they put in place, any organisation or anyone who's worked at that organisation who has criticised the state of Israel at any time in the last 7 years will be banned from going in. So that excludes virtually everyone who will be in this audience and wants to go in and help. And it'll just probably be a small number of American organisations that will do it the way the Israeli government want to do it. And I agree with Matt. I think that, you know, I'm a very subspecialised cancer surgeon. I cannot do in Gaza anything like the local surgeons do. And the main reason we go in there is to provide solidarity and to show our faces and to say that people care. We can do that from here as well. And to bear witness as well. And that is why, so I made a very conscious decision to speak out. A lot of us have as well. And indeed, I think it's more, I feel an absolute duty as a doctor, as an ethical duty to speak out for what I've seen. And to speak out also against our medical associations, our colleges, our institutions who have effectively, through their silence, been complicit in this.
Thank you. Does anyone want to take the suspension of the Israeli?
To add much, but I want to add that all the Palestinian doctors who are born in Palestine or they are descendants of Palestinians are not allowed to go. This happened after I left. And you know, already this is a big category. And also, I mean, there's no sense in rejection of the people. Not about speaking. Right? Some people who don't speak at all, they have been rejected. So this is not a reason, you know, not to speak, I think. We send 10, 15 people, they allow 2 or 3. So they are making like a thin line for the people to go in. And for any small mistakes, they send them back immediately from the checkpoints. If sometimes, you know, it's just the mood of the person who's there, they send them back. So I think what, you know, the doctors are doing outside is really great. I don't want to drive the people inside. They need support. They need people to go and help them. As I said, the most prominent doctors has been killed. You know, Dr. Ahmed, he knows. There's no proper plastic surgeon inside Gaza at this time while we are speaking. There are some good people who have very good experience, but they cannot handle that huge mass and so on in every specialty. So they need us, but I think they need also us to speak about it.
Thank you. I would like someone to take, maybe to wrap up, but just the point about the suspension of the Israeli Medical Association, is that correct? Maybe you touch on that. I know there was a question of obviously basically a beat and boycott of Israeli products. Why do Israeli medical products?
There was some disagreement here about the importance of getting the World Medical Association to boycott Israel. I will say this, when the BMA decided to suspend relations with the IMA, the Israeli medical establishment went up in arms. And so it touched a nerve. And I think that gives us an indication. Now, I think the World Medical Association is extremely problematic, and it's going to take a lot of work to get the World Medical Association to boycott. And I think that it's going to be incremental, and I think a lot of work needs to be done now by probably most of you were involved in getting the BMA to suspend, by you to getting your counterparts in other countries in the world that their local MAs will boycott. And if we create such a movement, and we have several countries that are on board, we can go for the big ask. And so I think it is a worthy struggle. I think just the struggle itself creates consciousness and awareness, and it is part of the act of solidarity that you were talking about. And we need, solidarity is the most important thing now. And when the people in Gaza, the doctors in Gaza heard that the BMA is suspending relations with the IMA, that gave them a boost. That gave them a boost. So we owe it to them now to go to the other European countries and get them also on board. I'll end with that.
No, just adding on to what you said, I think another important duty for us as medical professionals, nurses, paramedics, medical doctors, is to collect what I call evidence, that is research, because we need also evidence-based solidarity, which means to document at the sharp end what are the consequences and the results of the Israeli attacks, of the occupation, of the attacks on healthcare, all these brilliant papers that have come out actually since the 7th of October on life expectancy, the one on showing that the numbers of killed and injured were 41% underestimates, also published in The Lancet. And I have, with my friends and colleagues, very good experience of co-working with Palestinian medical staff in Gaza currently. They want to research, they want to make alliances with us to make more research. And I think we need to continue to publish the crude reality, the truth about the occupation, and not only slogans. Slogans are good, we need them, but we need more evidence-based solidarity, and that's very much up to us. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Did you thank the whole panel? So yes, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for all of you. Thank you for the panelists and the directors. So now we come to the challenge dinner will be served on the 8th floor for people who already want attendance.
Hi everyone. For people who are joining us from dinner, please set up for anyone who needs the cloakroom, it's on this exit on your right. You can get the elevator.